40% of households face a lower standard of living in retirement. Over the next few months, Eye on America will examine the uncertainties of retirement and retirement planning. And
It is a turbulent time to be living in the United States, and now some Americans are packing up and leaving, and they're deciding to live abroad, driven by factors like the cost of living.
Every single evening, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of international departure terminals across the United States, a quiet exodus is taking place. This is not a wave of young backpackers chasing adventure, nor is it a wealthy elite embarking on luxury vacations. Instead, these are senior citizens, gray-haired Americans holding one-way tickets to distant lands. They are the baby boomers, members of what was once celebrated as the most prosperous generation in human history. Yet today, they are fleeing the country they spent their entire lives building. They are becoming economic refugees, forced out by an unforgiving and deeply entrenched economic reality. The math behind this mass migration is simple, devastating, and entirely systemic. Consider the average monthly Social Security benefit in the United States, which currently stands at roughly $1,900. Now, contrast that with the median monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment across the nation, which has climbed to $1,500. When nearly 80% of an individual's fixed income is consumed entirely by shelter, the remaining $400 must somehow cover food, utilities, transport, and life-sustaining medicine. It is a mathematical impossibility. For millions of aging Americans, staying home means entering a state of slow financial suffocation. How did the world's sole economic superpower fail its own creators? How did a generation that once controlled over half of the wealth in America find themselves unable to afford the simple act of growing old on their own soil? This is not merely a collection of personal financial tragedies. This is a structural collapse of institutional trust, a systemic contraction that challenges the very foundation of the American dream. To understand the true nature of this silent exodus, one must look past personal savings habits and examine a profound structural mutation in the American financial architecture. For decades, the social contract of the United States dictated that a lifetime of labor would be rewarded with an ironclad guarantee, the defined benefit pension. Under this institutional model, corporations bore the entire investment risk, ensuring that retired workers received a predictable, lifelong paycheck. However, in 1978, a seismic shift occurred with the passage of the Revenue Act, which introduced Section 401k. Originally designed as a niche tax loophole for high-earning corporate executives, this single provision was aggressively weaponized over the following decades to dismantle the traditional pension system entirely. What followed was a massive predatory transfer of systemic risk from corporate balance sheets directly onto the fragile shoulders of individual citizens. Retirement was abruptly financialized. Millions of working-class Americans were transformed into involuntary Wall Street speculators, forced to bet their survival on the volatile fluctuations of global equity markets. The catastrophic failure of this macroeconomic experiment is now fully visible. According to recent demographic audits, only 69% of working boomers possess any retirement savings whatsoever, down drastically from 84% in 2011. Even for the segment that managed to save, the median nest egg is a mere $152,000. In an economy where specialized medical attention or assisted living can easily command over $100,000 annually, this sum represents not a safety net, but an absolute statistical illusion. The boomers are not leaving America out of a desire for adventure. They are fleeing an institutional collapse that has rendered their homeland economically unlivable for the aged. They are engaging in a desperate form of geographic arbitrage to survive the consequences of a 40-year-old financial trap. But as terrifying as a median savings of $152,000 sounds, it pales in comparison to the hidden architecture of the financial system itself. What the media completely ignores is that these identical 401k accounts are now tied to a ticking debt bomb so immense that even if a senior citizen did everything right, a little-known regulatory loophole allows banks to legally freeze and confiscate those private retirement assets the moment the broader market buckles. And the countdown to that exact systemic freeze has already crossed the point of no return. The global financial crisis of 2008 was the opening salvo of this generational destruction. Just as the oldest baby boomers were approaching their peak retirement age of 62, the subprime mortgage meltdown vaporized nearly one-third of their aggregate wealth, dissolving home equity, and stock portfolios in a matter of weeks. Fully 20% of these individuals never financially recovered from that shock. They were stripped of their primary asset class and forced to extend their working lives, trading their intended golden years for low-wage service sector jobs just to pay off accumulating debts. Then came the final crushing blow, the structural inflationary wave that gripped the global economy from 2021 through 2026. While the Federal Reserve aggressively raised benchmark interest rates to combat skyrocketing consumer prices, this macroeconomic medicine triggered a vicious feedback crisis. For seniors living on fixed incomes, a prolonged 6% inflation rate does not mean minor budgeting adjustments. It represents an absolute permanent destruction of purchasing power. The cost of basic necessities, groceries, electricity, utilities, surged past the modest annual cost of living adjustments provided by the state, turning guaranteed government checks into worthless paper. Compounding this disaster is the systemic trap of the domestic housing market. Escalating property taxes and soaring home insurance premiums, driven by climate risks and institutional real estate consolidation, have made home ownership financially unviable, even for those who fully paid off their mortgages decades ago. For the millions of boomers who rent, the situation is outright catastrophic. Institutional landlords, backed by private equity algorithms, have systematically hiked monthly rental rates by double-digit percentages year after year, transforming the American suburbs into a financial minefield for anyone without an active corporate salary. This is a blind recession, a quiet, crushing contraction where macroeconomic indicators claim the nation is wealthy, while its oldest citizens are actively being priced out of existence. The system has entered a terminal loop. The wealth of an entire generation is being systematically drained by structural forces completely beyond their individual control, leaving them with absolutely no domestic options for survival. But as devastating as this housing and inflation crisis appears, it is only a smokescreen hiding a far more sinister trap. Deep within the legislative framework of the American healthcare apparatus lies a hidden, algorithmic mechanism designed to do something truly terrifying. It is a financial kill switch that is triggered the moment an unsuspecting senior citizen crosses the border. Thousands of fleeing boomers are making one specific, seemingly minor paperwork error on their foreign residency visas right now, completely unaware that this single mistake authorizes the government to permanently freeze their remaining accounts and declare them international tax fugitives, leaving them entirely stranded abroad without a single dollar to their name. The true tipping point that transforms financial anxiety into immediate, panic-driven migration is the brutal structure of the American medical system. For generations, workers were led to believe that Medicare would serve as a universal shield against illness in their later years. This belief has proven to be a dangerous, structural miscalculation. Medicare contains massive, systemic blind spots, completely excluding long-term nursing care, routine dental work, hearing aids, and oversees medical emergencies from its base coverage. According to extensive financial audits by major investment firms, a healthy 65-year-old couple retiring in the United States today will need an average of $300,000 in cash just to cover their out-of-pocket healthcare expenses over the course of their retirement. This staggering figure does not even account for catastrophic illnesses or the skyrocketing cost of specialized prescription drugs. For a senior citizen with a median savings pool of $152,000, stepping into an American hospital is a direct path to immediate, irreversible bankruptcy. This stark reality creates an undeniable, forced incentive to flee. When contrasted with the emerging retirement havens of Latin America and Europe, the American system reveals its predatory nature. In nations like Ecuador, Mexico, or Thailand, high-quality private health care is not a luxury reserved for the ultra-wealthy, but an accessible public good. A comprehensive national health care plan in Ecuador costs less than $80 a month, and a complex dental procedure that would command thousands of dollars in New York or Los Angeles can be performed by Western-trained physicians for under $200. By crossing the border, American seniors are effectively opting out of a medical system that treats aging as a profit-generating commodity, using international borders to shield their remaining life savings from total liquidation. While the immediate tragedy unfolds at the individual level, the macroeconomic consequences of this mass migration are beginning to tear at the structural fabric of the United States economy. Historically, the aging population was viewed as an economic stabilizer. The so-called silver economy was expected to pour trillions of dollars back into domestic service sectors, supporting healthcare infrastructure, local real estate markets, and regional retail businesses, particularly in traditional retirement destinations like Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. Instead, as hundreds of thousands of boomers export themselves, they are pulling billions of dollars of consumer demand out of the domestic ecosystem entirely. This phenomenon constitutes a massive, unquantified capital flight. When an American retiree moves to Portugal or Colombia, their monthly Social Security check funded by the tax dollars of active American workers is instantly converted into foreign economic stimulus. These funds are no longer buying groceries in Miami or paying property taxes in Phoenix. They are paying rent in Lisbon and dining out in Mexico City. In effect, the United States government is inadvertently funding a massive stream of foreign direct investment into developing economies, while its own domestic regional economies face a slow, compounding starvation of consumer capital. This drain creates a dangerous vacuum. Local healthcare networks lose their most stable customer base, municipal tax revenues dry up, and the service industries built around supporting an aging population face an unprecedented structural contraction. The American dream is not just fading for the individuals who leave, its departure is actively eroding the economic foundations left behind. From a global macroeconomic perspective, the exodus of American baby boomers represents a highly sophisticated, albeit desperate, deployment of financial arbitrage. These retirees are utilizing the structural global hegemony of the United States dollar as a defensive shield against the economic decay of their own homeland. When a senior citizen transfers their remaining capital out of the domestic financial system, they are engaging in an involuntary process of geographic currency weaponization. A fixed monthly income of $2,000 is mathematically unviable within the hyperinflationary borders of Los Angeles, Chicago, or Miami. However, when that exact same capital is injected into the developing economies of Southeast Asia or Latin America, its structural purchasing power undergoes an immediate massive multiplication. In these foreign destination nations, the local cost of basic living is frequently 70 to 80% lower than the American national average. Consequently, an American retiree who would legally qualify as near impoverished in Washington, D.C., is instantly transformed into a member of the affluent upper middle class in places like Chiang Mai, Thailand, or Medellin, Colombia. This is not merely an individual lifestyle adjustment, it is an organized systemic exploitation of global economic inequality. By moving abroad, the American boomer effectively short-circuits the domestic inflation loop. They are using the relative strength of the United States dollar to purchase an artificial level of financial stability and premium healthcare that their own country's infrastructure refuses to provide. It is a structural defense mechanism against a domestic fiat system that has systematically devalued their lifetime of labor through persistent state-sanctioned monetary expansion. However, this massive influx of American pension capital carries heavy geopolitical and social consequences for the host nations, sparking a secondary crisis of international structural gentrification. The arrival of hundreds of thousands of relatively wealthy American retirees has fundamentally distorted local real estate markets and socioeconomic balances across the globe. In historic cities such as Lisbon, Portugal, or San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, the sheer volume of United States dollars pouring into residential property has driven housing costs up by 300 to 400% over the past decade. Local wages, which remain strictly tethered to developing market realities, cannot possibly compete with the overwhelming purchasing power of imported American entitlement checks. As a direct result, entire generations of local citizens are being aggressively displaced from their historical urban centers, completely unable to afford rent, property taxes, or basic consumer goods in their own hometowns. This demographic occupation creates an underlying current of intense geopolitical friction and social unrest. Host countries find themselves trapped in a dangerous economic paradox. On one hand, Their governments desperately need the foreign currency inflows and consumer spending brought by the American silver exodus to support their own sovereign balance of payments. On the other hand, this very same capital actively destabilizes their domestic social fabric, leading to policy reversals such as Portugal eliminating its popular non-habitual resident tax exemptions due to severe domestic backlash. Anti-expatriate movements are surging across Southern Europe and Latin America, turning the forced migration of American seniors into a primary flashpoint of 21st century international class warfare. The structural failures of the American domestic economy are effectively being exported to the rest of the world, destabilizing foreign communities in the process. For the millions of American citizens venturing outside their borders, this geographic escape route is rarely a permanent or seamless solution. Instead, it is riddled with complex regulatory traps, specifically designed to penalize the mobile senior. The most devastating of these mechanisms is embedded deep within the financial architecture of the United States healthcare apparatus, the late enrollment penalty for Medicare Part B. Many retirees mistakenly believe they can pause their domestic coverage while living abroad to save money. However, if they are ever forced to return to the United States due to severe illness, they face an unforgiving compounding financial penalty. For every single 12-month period a senior remains unregistered while residing overseas, their future Medicare Part B premiums are permanently and irrevocably increased by 10%. For a retiree who spends a decade abroad before returning home to face a terminal medical diagnosis, their baseline healthcare costs are effectively doubled by the state for the rest of their natural life. This structural penalty transforms eventual repatriation into an absolute financial execution, trapping aging citizens in a state of permanent international exile. Simultaneously, this mass migration has catalyzed the rise of a highly specialized corporate industry known as exported care. Major multinational real estate conglomerates and private equity firms have recognized the profound financial vulnerability of the baby boomer generation. In response, they are rapidly constructing ultra-exclusive gated medical enclaves across Mexico, Thailand, and Central America. These corporate fortresses are designed specifically to harvest American entitlement capital, offering westernized elder care and advanced medical surveillance at a fraction of domestic costs. However, these facilities operate completely outside the regulatory protections of United States law. Residents are often subjected to volatile foreign legal frameworks, sudden visa policy overhauls, and the constant threat of arbitrary eviction if their private assets run dry, leaving them physically vulnerable in an unfamiliar legal vacuum. The ultimate core risk of this phenomenon is the absolute disintegration of the Western social contract. It exposes a terrifying macroeconomic reality. A lifetime of labor, productivity, and tax compliance within a developed superpower is no longer sufficient to guarantee a dignified, peaceful existence on one's own native soil. When a nation's economic model forces its elder generation to choose between domestic poverty and international exile, the fundamental illusion of systemic stability is shattered, leaving subsequent generations to face an even more volatile and uncertain path toward their own eventual decline. The grand exodus of the baby boomers is far more than a collection of individual survival stories. It is the ultimate macro indicator of a structural dead end. For nearly half a century, the Western economic model has relied heavily on continuous monetary expansion, asset financialization, and the systematic privatization of systemic risk. By substituting reliable, collective pension frameworks with volatile, market-driven retirement accounts, the state effectively transformed a fundamental social contract into a speculative gamble. The silent migration we are witnessing today is the tangible, mathematical invoice of that transition coming due. When the senior citizens of the world's leading superpower can no longer afford to age on their own soil, it signals that the economic engine is no longer designed to sustain the human life cycle of its ordinary citizens. It is a stark demonstration that the wealth of a nation, when measured strictly by corporate profit margins and inflated stock market valuations, can completely decouple from the actual lived well-being of the population. This outward tide represents a massive, unprecedented transfer of generational wealth and state-funded entitlements away from the domestic economy. The very capital meant to anchor regional communities, fund local services, and sustain the domestic silver economy is instead fleeing across international borders, seeking survival in the gaps of global economic inequality. But as these borders tighten and popular destination cities face intense local backlash from foreign gentrification, this emergency escape valve is rapidly closing. The strategy of geographic arbitrage is a temporary luxury, a finite window of opportunity made possible only by the lingering asymmetric dominance of the United States dollar. This reality leaves us with a profound, unsettling question for the global financial order. If the baby boomers, the largest, most prosperous, and historically wealthiest generation in the history of the modern world, are being systematically priced out of their own country, what hope remains for the generations that follow? When Generation X and the millennials reach their own retirement age, burdened by historic levels of student debt, stagnant real wages, and an even more hollowed out public infrastructure, where will they go? Will there be any affordable havens left on a hyper-gentrified, fully globalized planet, or will they face a crisis of elder poverty unlike anything seen in the modern era? We want to hear your perspective on this structural shift. Is this the definitive end of the American social contract, or is it merely the beginning of a completely new, borderless global economy? Share your analysis in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of the global economy. To ensure you never miss our deep dive reports on the forces reshaping our financial universe, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Subscribe for more fact-based global analysis.